Cool. So give me a second. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up. Cool. Awesome. So just like a quick intro about like who I am and who we are. So my name is Shafumi. I'm one of the co-founders of Collab, and we're here hosting this event with you today with Mostafa. And so just a little bit about us. We're a part-time remote program for career switchers who are looking to break into the tech industry and sort of like develop their skills. So we've trained over 500 people so far, and 95% of our graduates always feel like they're a lot more confident. We're all about belonging, which is why our slogan is "You Belong in Tech." We also have a great career advancement rate, which is about 85%. So we particularly help product managers, product designers, and software developers transition into the tech industry or gain more experience. So we have alumni at Apple, Microsoft, Google, a lot of the top tech companies. And a couple house rules here while you're here in these events. We are recording these events, so we'll be posting it online. So if you're here and your cameras are on and you're just participating, you're definitely just granting consent. We encourage you to engage via the live chat. If you have questions, definitely feel free to put them in there. If you have any takeaways, feel free to tag us on social media, tag me, tag the speaker, and feel free to stay behind and connect with one another during the networking portion of the event. And then make sure like you have fun, be respectful of people, be respectful of the speaker, be respectful, be present. So definitely wanted to share all of that before we got started. And thank you all for taking the time to join us. And now we will get started with the event. And I would like to, start by introducing our speaker, which is Mostafa. Go ahead, and would you just quickly like to give us like a quick intro of like who you are and sort of like what you do?
Hey everybody, my name is Mostafa. I lead our product and design team here at Snap Commerce. Pretty much been in product management my whole career, worked at a multitude of different types of startups, ranging from B2B SaaS to marketplaces to e-commerce, travel, fintech. So I got a chance to see how product management is a bit different depending on the product they're working on, the end user that you're building for, and the ecosystem or the space that you're building your product in. Building a successful product in the fintech space is different than building a successful product in the travel space. And that was a great learning that I got throughout my career. I joined Snap Commerce back early days. We were about 10 people at the time and basically joined as the first product person, basically joined a bunch of engineering cowboys running all over the place. And my goal was to try to put a bit of a method to the madness. And then fast forward 4 years now, we've grown the company more than 30-fold. We've grown the team more than 20-fold, and continue to grow and add some talented folks like yourself as we try to expand our suite of products and add value to our customers. That's the quick 2-minute spiel about myself.
Cool, awesome. And could you just give us like a quick overview of like what does Snap Commerce do? What is Snap Commerce in the industry? I guess in commerce, but a little bit about what the company does, so everyone gets to know what you get to work on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So high level at Snap Commerce, we help our customers, which are usually basically the low income, low credit score folks, be able to save money and get the best that life has to offer. So there's a few different. We started off as a travel product. And basically grew that travel product over time. While we were growing it, what we realized is the main value proposition that we were adding value to our customers were helping them save money. And then we set out to figure out how we can add more of that value. What that ended up doing is allowing us to be able to expand into helping our customers save money in e-commerce, be able to sell, help them tackle some of their financial problems by building products specifically tailored for that kind of low income, low credit score folks that sometimes the system is usually rigged against you, whether it's like you're trying to apply for a credit card or whatever it may be. And so how can we build great solutions that add value to them and kind of help them climb up the income ladder? So, yeah.
Wow, that's remarkable, and that's very impactful stuff. I know product managers love to work on things that are impacting people. The word impact is obviously thrown around a lot. So to be working on a product that helps uplift others, I think that is truly amazing. So let's actually just start by sharing with the audience. So I know a lot of folks in the audience, especially in our community, are trying to break into product management. So can we just quickly just talk about your experience and how you ended up breaking into product management for the first time, and then sort of like we'll then talk about your journey moving forward from there.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, so for me, how I got into product management, I didn't even know product management existed. I think for me, it was I had the desire to build something and to add value somehow. I used to think that the only way you could do that is by starting your own company, being an entrepreneur, starting your own project, doing something in that sense. So that's what I did. I basically did that. I started a couple of startups. One of them failed miserably. And that learning I took, which is basically I built the product without really validating the need or doing research earlier on. And that was like a bit of an expensive mistake, but it was a great mistake that stuck with me that I vowed to never make again, which then I then took a stab at it a year afterwards to try a second startup, which is so my first startup, just to clarify, was basically at the time Google, Apple Wallet, and all those things didn't even exist. And so a lot of the loyalty programs were a card, and you have to show them the card. If you forgot the card, tough luck. And I wanted to better digitalize some of these cards, or build like a loyalty program similar to like an Air Miles, but for the mom and pop shops. But I realized there's a lot of challenges that go with that, and so we ended up shutting it down. And so that was the first startup. I learned my mistake there, and then in the second startup, what I did is I tried to basically be as lean as possible. So I started off. I said, okay, well, what's my MVP? And to give you guys the context, is the problem that I was trying to solve was actually my own problem. At the time, I was super busy. I didn't feel like I had time to be able to cook healthy meals for myself, or meal prep for myself, so I can eat those meals over time during the week. And I wanted a service that would just do it for me. I'll buy 7 to 10 meals, put them in the fridge, and reheat them throughout the week. And that would save a bit of my time, and I was willing to pay for it. At the time, I used to live in Montreal, and that service didn't really exist there. Right now, this service pretty much exists. There's dozens of these services all over the place. But at the time, it didn't exist. And so I said, okay, well, great, it doesn't exist. I wonder if I can figure out how to solve my own problem in the most minimal way possible. And so what I did is basically I whipped up a Shopify website together. I found a kitchen. I rented it by the hour. I found a chef and I hired him by the hour. I found a delivery driver and I hired him by the hour. And basically I think I spent like $2,000 all in to just kickstart it, and never put in a single cent afterwards. And that allowed me to be able to then basically launch with something, best stab at something, be able to test it out. My main sources of acquisition at the time were family and friends in the beginning to kickstart it. But almost everybody stopped ordering because they're not the target demographic. They were there to help support you and whatnot, but in the end of the day, they're not the ones that were gaining. Like, they're not the product market fit is not there, and so they're not going to continue to order from you. And so, but majority of the people that I was acquiring through channels like Google and Facebook were the ones that were continuously ordering week in and week out. And so we grew that company from basically $0 in sales to doing about $10,000 in sales a month, which was great, decent success. But what you realize is, like, it's a tough business being in the food business. And so basically to wrap it up, it just I realized it was tough to scale. Around the same time, I decided to take a step back and see what I enjoyed about the process, because when you're bootstrapping your own company, you are like the product manager, the product designer, the developer, the QA, the maybe sometimes the cook or the delivery driver if the delivery driver didn't show up. Like you had to hustle basically to make it work. And so at the time, I just realized that product piece and the product design piece was what got me super excited, is being able to hear people's feedback, to be able to iterate on it and be able to continuously build a better and better product over time. And I just decided I wanted to do that in a tech company where I had the resources. I'm not bootstrapped, and I work with talented engineers, user researchers, product designers, what have you, to be able to build products that don't just affect the lives of like hundreds of people that I was doing it, but doing it for millions of people potentially. And that's what got me into basically my first gig, which was at Influitive. And in the interview, the only thing they would talk about it was that company that I started, how I did everything, and they were just analyzing everything and getting my thought process there. So.
That's awesome and a remarkable story. I can never get tired of hearing that. I know we've connected before, and I got to hear your amazing story and the importance of building something and showcasing to people that you understand what an MVP is, you know how to build products, you know how to solve people's problems. That's what product management is all about. So now I want to then switch gears into, you've been a product manager, you've been an entrepreneur. What is it like being like the senior director of product or like a head of product at Snap Commerce? Like, what is your day-to-day like and stuff like
that? That's a good question. So I think it depends on so many factors, and it depends on kind of what the needs of the company and the product are at that time. At a certain point, I actually spent 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. in back-to-back interviews and meetings. At the time, I had the reason I did that is because I had 11 direct reports. It was just very unsustainable, and so my top priority was actually hiring. So I spent a lot of my time in hiring and growing the leaders within my team to be able to do it sustainably over the long term, because that like I could have. In the short term, I could have dealt with it, but sustainably in the long term, I wouldn't have been able to. At other times, I spent time doing user research, thinking about product strategy. At other times, I focused with the team on improving our execution, our delivery. Like maybe we thought we had a solid strategy that would last us for the next 3 to 6 months, and we just need to execute on it and be able to iterate fast and whatnot. And so there, where I could spend more, the highest leverage of my time is to spend it with the team, and how can we get learnings earlier and be able to improve our execution and delivery. At other times, I also stepped in to focus on growth. And so it really depends on the context. Right now, I'm in a great position where I've hired great directors that report to me. I've hired very senior PMs and PMs that have taken majority of the load off of me. So I could die tomorrow, and the team will be successful and will be smooth sailing, which actually I find it sometimes people in leadership levels see that as a threat. I actually think that that's what you're a successful leader if you're a CEO of a company and you can die tomorrow, but the company still runs itself. That means you set it up properly, and so that's kind of how I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing that you've actually empowered your team and you spent, like I know you mentioned you've been at the company for 4 years. So you've spent that time. I'm sure you've learned a lot of stuff and then you've taught other people so then they can execute some of the things. So that's remarkable. And I love the philosophy of we certainly hope you live very long, but the philosophy of making sure that things can run without you essentially. Could you share what you're most proud of that you've worked on at the company? So whether that's like a particular feature or a product line, could you just like walk us through that product, and it will sort of like get into the meat of it and then talking about data moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's lots to be proud of my time here. I think maybe the biggest proudest moment is how we were thinking big and adding value to our users beyond our just first product. So to give you guys some color of how we expanded again from travel. As we realized that we built like a successful business, we did like $0 in sales, and then we started doing more than 500 million a year. And throughout that time, what we realized is the value that we were adding is helping them save money. And so we said to ourselves, how can we do more of that? We realized that there was a bit of a ceiling to provide more of that value in travel, because people are going to travel once or twice a year. You can't force somebody to travel every single month. And so there was a bit of a ceiling to the amount of value that you can provide. And so we said to ourselves, why are we restricting ourselves to just travel? Like, why not ask them open-ended questions about other use cases we can help them save money on? And that's when our customers are, oh, can you help me save money on these Jordan sneakers or Sonos speakers or what have you? And they gave us a bit more of those e-commerce type of products that we can help them save money on. That gave us a bit conviction to be able to expand to helping them save money on that. The second part is, and then during that time as well, we found that there was some data points that that showed us that a lot of our customers were actually using debit cards to pay for transactions, and that was very interesting. It was more than the usual, and so we dug in a bit deeper there and to find out why the case why that was the case, and that would give us a bit more conviction. I can touch on that a bit more down the line as well.
Cool. That's super exciting. So, what metrics would you say that you use to, measure the success of, even let's even just start at like the company level, and what are the things that you look for to know that things are going well and they're on track?
That's a good question. So it was easier when we were just a travel company. Like our North Star metric was easier. So at the time we looked at net revenue because we cared a lot about growth. And so we looked at net revenue growth. And usually in general, like our valuation was always a multiple of that net revenue. And so as we think about building a more successful business, how can we grow that net revenue? But not looking at that in silo. We run a tight ship, and so we want to make sure that we grow sustainably instead of growing like maybe other SoftBank funded startups unsustainably, and so we always looked at making sure our ROAS, or return on ad spend, or our LTV to CAC was the right metric to be able to continuously grow in that sense. And then over time, we've had different metrics depending on the goals that we had. So for example, sometimes we prioritized retention, but then we came to the conclusion that retention was a bit tough to do on the travel side. But taking a step back, once you actually become a multi-product company, each product is different, and it depends on what purpose that product serves in your product strategy. That's when then the measure of progress of the components of your strategy. So the purpose that our travel product serves in our overall cohesive strategy is different than the fintech product, different than the e-commerce product. So the travel product and the e-commerce product could be great ways to be able to acquire customers and grow our overall business. The fintech product could be a really great way to keep our users engaged and retained within our ecosystem. And so the metrics that you would look at are a bit different for the success of each one. The fintech product might not need to make money, for example, or but as long as you're just retaining your customers, and those customers are then continuously buying in these other areas, that could be beneficial. Not saying that I recommend not making money. You need to always have a strategy to be able to improve your unit economics over time. And then the second thing to mention is just make sure to avoid vanity metrics. Vanity metrics, sometimes people, especially maybe early PMs, can fall into the trap of like, oh, monthly active users or daily active users, and seeing that grow and improve over time. While it could be helpful to look at it, could be other factors that are affecting it, and it might not necessarily be directly tied to your goals. And so need to kind of give it a second thought sometimes there.
Yeah, that's super helpful. There's actually, funny enough, perfectly timed. There was a question in the chat about, vanity metrics, which, Claudio asked, more on the topic question, do you build products features more towards vanity metrics? And then how do you decide on what criteria establish like the right market fit?
Yeah, no, I avoid vanity metrics as much as possible. Um, Again, I think so. To take a step back, when you think about your product strategy, and there's different ways to articulate a product strategy, but let's say a simple way to articulate it is it's a collection of hypotheses. And some of those hypotheses you validate, and those become core components of your strategy that you continue to improve over time. Part of the when you create those hypotheses, you need to have specific proxy metrics that measure your progress or your like to be able to validate or invalidate this hypothesis. And so those are usually the metrics that really matter the most for you to be able to understand the progress in that specific area. Market fit. So that's a pretty interesting one. One of the things that we've evolved our thinking over time is we stopped actually thinking about product market fit, and we looked at product market channel model fit. And it's basically a 4-fits model that was I think created by Brian Balfour, one of the founders of Reforge. That I think makes a lot of sense. So product market fit, you can build the best product that solves a specific problem for a user. And there's a lot of really good products out there that have failed and have not been able to be successful. So building a great product is not enough. You need to be able to marry that product with the right channel of acquisition to be able to grow. And different products have some strong channels of acquisition that allow them to be able to grow. If you think about Yelp, for example, they used a content loop through SEO to allow them to be able to scale, and that allows them to be able to scale more. If you look at Booking.com, they leveraged paid ad loops to be able to scale over time. If you look at Cash App, for example, they leveraged a organic viral loop through their peer-to-peer payment feature to be able to grow over time. And so you need to really think about the product, market, channel, and model fit to be able to marry those 4 pieces together to build a $100+ million business in that sense.
Well, that's a lot. I'm actually learning a lot as well because I haven't heard that put in that way, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you mentioned even just taking a look at Snap Commerce, there's the travel product, there's the commerce, there's the fintech, and there's all of these like different data and metrics. Like, what does it even mean to be a data-driven PM? Because you've done it and you're actually also helping other people grow. How would you define a data-driven product manager, and what does it mean to be one?
That's a good question. We have data-driven actually as one of our core values as a company overall, and how we define it there is we use first principles, experimentation, user research, and personal insight to ideate and think big. Ultimately, we let customers and data decide what sticks for us, basically. And to dig a bit deeper too is really to summarize is you're trying to use data to pursue the truth instead of making yourself or your product look better through vanity metrics. That's really the end goal, is you want to use data points to be able to help you get conviction, to be able to get to the truth faster. The faster you get to the truth, the easier you're going to get the product market channel model fit, and the easier your life is going to be. And yeah, that's basically how I would think about it in that sense.
Yeah, I think very well put, like using data to get to the truth. So now, could you then give us or share different ways that you or other PMs at Snap Commerce use data to make better decisions, like towards getting that truth? So could you just walk us through like a simple example or case study of how you get to that truth, how you measure that, and how would you form that argument or case when you're working on product or feature?
That's a good question. So broadly speaking, I would say that there are 3 sources of insight. There's data insight, there's user insight, and there's strategic insight. And if I use the same example that I mentioned when we evolved and got conviction to build the fintech product, the data insight there, we start off actually with the data insight, and which was we were seeing that 60 to 70% of our customers were paying using debit cards. And that was a pretty interesting number because it was higher than the average. And then we said, okay, let's dig in to be able to get a bit user insight into why that is. And so what we did is we did a quick survey to be able to understand why people were using debit cards, why didn't they have a credit card, and people were like, oh, I couldn't get approved for a credit card, and so they gave us a bit more qualitative answers. And some of those answers also set more hypotheses for us. They're like, okay, well, I wonder why they can't get approved for a credit card. What's their credit score like? And so we asked them what their credit score and what's their income, and then that helped validate our hypothesis that a lot of these customers are actually low income, low credit score folks, and that's why they weren't able to get some of these great credit cards and great rewards on credit cards. And then the third insight, which is the strategic insight, that I think it was more of like that broader fintech trend, especially related to embedded financial services. So over time, maybe 10 years ago, it would have been very hard for us to be able to spin up a fintech product because we had to build the whole infrastructure ourselves. But right now, there's a lot of companies that operate as banking as a service companies, or there's a lot of companies that built modularized all the different pieces of building a bank, basically, that allowed us to be able to build a successful fintech product in a much lower amount of time than it would have taken us 10 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how, like, you use some data, you gather some more information, you get more data, gather additional information up until when you sort of like figure out the response and even coming up with all of those hypotheses. So thank you so much for sharing. That's like a real life example of like how you've used data to even transition the move from like travel to finance. So that's like a big move. What about like an everyday example? So let's say if you're working on a feature, you don't want to do any huge pivots, but you just want to make a small iteration. It's not commerce. Is that something that PMs will still leverage data to do? Or could you give us like a small example of just using data to just make a quick decision on how you can move forward?
So maybe a quick example is like you think that customers are, you have a hypothesis that the customers are willing to tip us because we're helping them save money. And you can spend a lot of time building like the tipping functionality and ability to be able to capture that payment separate from the original payment that they were doing. And there's a lot of nuances there, here and there. Or what you could do is just pretend you have that feature and use it as a fake door feature where you see if you have it there and how many people will actually click on it and how many people would tip it for you. And that's a great way to be able to get very, very actionable data, because user research can help you and people can tell you what they're going to do, but usage data gives you way higher conviction. And so doing a fake door test, even though it's annoying for potentially some of those customers that might have clicked on it, but if you're doing it for a only short period of time with a certain amount of your users, you're able to get enough conviction that then allowed you to say, okay, actually people are willing to tip us. And the funny part is pretty much everybody in the whole company was laughing at it when our co-founder suggested it, Henry, and he's like, no, I know these people, I know they would want to tip us. And given that we're a culture of experimentation and being data driven, we said, hey, let's let the data speak for itself, and that's what lets it stick. And the funny part is tips right now represent a good chunk of our revenue, and this came from like just a very small idea that was very whack out of there. I myself laughed at it, but now who's laughing? So
well, that's such a great example, and thanks for giving us like a real world example of how you can have a question or a hypothesis, actually test it out, experiment it. And so my next question is, so for people who don't have a data background, I know you mentioned like data driven as part of a culture at Snap Commerce. How do you empower folks to use data, or even just like advise folks, like if they're not used to playing around with data, how can they get more data savvy, and how can they start using it to make better decisions, or to be just better data driven?
Yeah. So the high level answer is making it as self-serve as possible. Back when I started to be a PM, I remember one of the needs was, hey, I need to know SQL so I can run these queries myself and I can do the analysis myself. And while it's a great skill set to have, you don't need to know SQL to be able to look at data points and be able to get insights from it. And so right now we live in a great world where there's a lot of tools out there that product teams can implement to be able to allow them to get the data points that they want. And it's very self-serve. It's just like, it's all drag and drop. You're clicking on UI. There's not much that you need to write. Some of these tools are like Amplitude, which is our preferred tool that we leverage. There's Amplitude, there's Mixpanel, there's Heap, there's a multitude of different tools out there that allow you to be able to do analysis on your own. There's some fundamentals of analysis that you want to learn, but none of this is rocket science. All of it, you can learn it on Google. And a lot of it is just also trial and error. So over time, you'll run an A/B test and you probably will make a mistake in the A/B test that nullifies like the overall A/B test or the results in it, and you'll learn from those mistakes. And next time around, you'll make sure that to not run that mistake. An example of that is I didn't know when I was running some of my A/B tests that, hey, if I change my bucket weights over in the middle of the A/B test, that actually could have some bias towards the results of the A/B test. This is something called Simpson's paradox that I didn't know about. But then after somebody on my team on the engineering side that has really good statistical experience was able to point it out, and then I read into it and I was like, okay, that's a great point. Let's run an experiment again, and I'll make sure to never make this mistake again. And then you coach other folks to do the same thing. And so honestly, I didn't need to have any background in data, or I didn't need to be very data savvy. A lot of it comes with trial and error, and also comes with a lot of experience in applying the data in that sense. With that said, though, I think not every single business you can have an abundance of data. I think sometimes it's easier to have data, a mass amount of data points when you're a B2C business. When you're a B2B business, I would say, based on my experience, sometimes you lean a bit more on the qualitative data points instead of the quantitative or usage data or whatever it may be, to be able to drive to certain decisions. You'll find a lot of B2B businesses out there. Sometimes their roadmap is very heavily influenced by some of their big enterprise customers. And that's like an example of like how qualitative feedback or data points are actually a bigger, or have more weight in these B2B type of products versus a B2C product, where it's easier to run experiments and be able to get statistically significant results.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks for clarifying and sharing some of that with us. And I think this is also another question that I've always wanted to ask. And I know you touched on it a little bit, but generally, and when you're trying to make an average decision, when making decisions on what to build next, there is I know you mentioned nothing beats usage data. How does that play a role compared to the more qualitative approach? I know you mentioned on the B2B side, people lean towards more qualitative, but how do you figure out that balance when the data is telling you one thing, but users are telling you another thing? How do you resolve that? And is there a good practice on what to do when you're in the position with qualitative and quantitative to make the best decisions for your users?
That's a very hard question. I don't know if I have an answer or a silver bullet for it. I think that's probably why we get paid money, is so that you can make those trade-offs and be able to make the right decision, and be able to weight different qualitative data points versus quantitative data points, and be able to make the right decision. You can also marry that with your intuition, and so I don't know if I have like a silver bullet. I think a lot of it depends on the product, depends on also your organization. Sometimes certain organizations are very, very data heavy, and other organizations are more qualitative or user or design heavy. Like if you think maybe about actually Airbnb, I used to think they're very design heavy, and they are from a perception perspective, but they leverage data points in a lot of their experiments, and and so they still marry a lot of like data and user insights to be able to make decisions. But sometimes, depending on their values, depending on many aspects, they make certain decisions that maybe the data is saying one thing, but they're overriding that data because that's the world that they want to build, and they're okay with that. And so I think it really depends sometimes on a few different factors.
Cool, awesome. I have two more questions quickly before we sort of like open it up for others to ask questions, and then we'll do the networking a little bit. So, going back to metrics and even reflecting on your career now that you're a head of product, overseeing several PMs, designers, and user researchers, what would you say are the top three metrics that you have kept track of with your own career growth? If you think about it that way, if you don't have metrics, feel free to like share just like three pillars or three values that are sort of like kept you going in your practice. I know you mentioned something very influential here, which is empowering others. So what other things would you say are important for you as you grow in your career, so others can also learn if they want to mirror a similar career as yours?
So I think about this in maybe in two different ways. So the first way, how I measure if I'm happy at a place and I continue to be happy and stay here is I think about growth. And I think about growth in three different dimensions. So the first dimension is skill set growth. Am I improving my skill set? Second dimension is career growth. Am I growing in my career over time? And then third dimension is monetary growth. I care a lot about making a lot of money to be able to get the freedom that I want, to be able to do the things that I want. And so being able to, in general, I think companies will allow you to be able to make significant progress in one or two of these things. Throughout my time at Snap Commerce, I felt like I've gotten significant progress in all of these three things. And that's what keeps me happy and keeps me around. Being at a startup for 4 years kind of seems like 8 years. So it seems like double the amount of time. But I still continue to be happy. And so that's kind of how I think about it in growth. But then the other part is I think about it is also in values. In general, I think values to me are very important when I join a company, and making sure my values are aligned with their values, more or less. It's never going to be perfect, but the reason I say that is because it's important, because there's always situations where you're going to disagree with folks, disagree with founders, disagree on decisions, whatever it may be, and that's totally normal. But it becomes tough when your values are a bit out of or not in sync with your peers' values, and that's where you're just going to you're going to be in a loop of consistent frustration, and that doesn't make sense for you and for the company, and so it's not really the right fit. But if you join a team that shares more or less the same values, like we talked about, like data driven, moving fast, being open and transparent, these are 3 of our 6 values that we have as a company. It allows you to be able to handle a lot of the different situations that come up, because more or less your values are the same.
Cool, awesome. And last question for me is, what advice would you give for people who are trying to break into product management for the very first time? And then after this question, I'm happy to open it up to the audience for a few questions before we start the networking.
Yeah, I feel like there's a few different paths that I've personally noticed. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but a few different paths that I've found is, one is like finding an APM role. It's usually the path that has the most intense competition, because a lot of people want to get into product management, and there's usually not a lot of APM roles or rotational PM roles. So there's a lot of competition there. Second is you can join CoLab and get the experience that allows you to be able to land a role, which is very similar to what I mentioned about, or at least my my trajectory, which is starting your own project or company or product with some moderate traction and using that as a springboard to be able to land a role in product. Um, the other one is also from the one that I see the most success with is moving from another department within your current company. And a big part of why that is because you kind of understand the product, you understand the customers pretty well. So the transition is easier if you show the initiative, and if you have some of the competencies that PMs have. And so that, in my opinion, I've been like a mentor at APM Toronto. I've mentored a lot of people earlier on in their careers in product, and I've seen that that's like one of the most successful ways people get into product, from support, from finance, from whatever it may be, all different disciplines and walks of life. And then the last one I would say is building domain expertise in a certain area, and then transitioning to be a PM in that area. Actually, a very good friend of mine did this over a span of 6 years, where he actually got a role. He wanted to be in product earlier on, but he wasn't able to get in there. But he got a role in ad tech, in ad operations. He understood ad tech and in ads and how they work, both from the publisher side and from the demand side. And then he was able to understand that space in a much deeper level. He was able to grow in that career and have a lot of domain expertise. And then he found a role within a company that was building an ad tech product, and they wanted somebody that understood product management, and he did. He took some courses and whatnot, but then he didn't have actual like tangible experience. He showed some initiative in his previous roles, but he wasn't able to get it. Again, it's never going to go your way. He tried to do what I just said, which is moving from one department to the other, but it didn't work out. But because he built that expertise, it allowed him to be able to then join another company that was building a product that he had a lot of understanding for. And then lastly, I think these are all the different paths that I mentioned, but I think taking a program like Reforge, which is one of my favorite programs in terms of product knowledge, it allows you to be able to build great basics to apply it at any of the paths that I mentioned above. So.
Wow, very thorough. Love that. Love like every single thing that you sort of like broken down. So now we'll sort of like take questions. There's one in the chat from Claudio. So we'll take a couple questions and then we'll put people in breakout rooms and chat. So the first question from Claudio is, how was the ramp up period between when you were a new hire and how soon did you begin gaining more and more ownership over projects and tasks? So it's talking about ramp up now if you're just like a new PM.
Yeah, that's a good question. So for me, I was thrown into the fire right away, especially joining like a 10 people startup. And my onboarding was literally, here's an IKEA desk, you need to put it together and start working. Versus today, we have like a solid onboarding of a week where we share context and whatnot. I think if you think about it just in general, it takes time, especially in product, to be able to gain context about your product and to be able to perform at a better rate. And so a lot of the beginning is how can you hit the ground running and help the team continue to deliver on what they were delivering. And then over time, spending time to gain context on the different pieces of your product or feature that you're owning, gaining context on the different levers that allow that product to be successful, gaining context on the dependencies, all that stuff. I think that usually will take 3 months to 3 to 6 months, depending on the product or where it's at. If it's a mature product that has a lot of context, like our travel product, there's so much context into it, versus maybe a more newer product that has less context that might allow you to be able to hit the ground running more. It also depends on the context that you have within that space. Like if let's say you've been an ad tech PM for forever and you join an ad tech company as an ad tech PM again, you'll probably hit the ground running much faster than if you join a travel company and you don't know anything about travel and you need to understand the overall space and the ecosystem there.
Cool, that's awesome. Next question from Donovan. What are some obstacles that you faced, like Snap Commerce faced, when you pivoted or moved from one industry to another industry? Like for example, like you said, travel to fintech, to commerce. What were like the huge obstacles or huge learnings there?
Oh. I'll highlight maybe two obstacles. So on the fintech side, we're very used to moving fast and getting stuff done. But in the fintech side, you have to partner with a bank because we're not going to get a banking charter at this point. A lot of the fintechs, the biggest new banks in the world, are already always partner with banks. They don't even go and get banking charters themselves. And so it makes sense from our side. But with that, there's a lot of complexity that gets added to it. Then you need to, when we want to run an experiment, we need to make sure it goes through the bank's compliance and they need to sign off on it. And that increases. I talk a lot about like iteration and making sure the iteration time is smaller, but inherently that will always increase it over time. And so that's one challenge. And doesn't mesh well with our DNA, but it's a challenge that we would have to live by if you want to build a product in that space. When I talk about the e-commerce space, it's very similar to actually the travel space because it's like a marketplace, right? Like you've got the people that want to book, and you've got the suppliers, the people that want to sell something, and you're connecting them really together. It is similar in that sense. But there's much more different nuances in terms of the supplier ecosystem in the travel space is different than the supplier system in an e-commerce space. It could be potentially more aggregated, or there's much more competitors, or the amount of also the selling a hotel is more of like, it's similar to like a virtual good. Like you don't need to like deliver it and fulfill it to them, versus when you're selling like a tangible product where you need to make sure that arrives to them. And so it adds a bit of a different dimension of complexity in that sense. So hopefully those two examples were helpful.
Cool, awesome. And last question, I know we're a bit over time in terms of also the networking, but final question, Brunel is asking, in terms of competency, I think this is a great question. What distinguishes junior PMs from experienced PMs, or even PMs like who are senior PMs? Like, what would you say is the difference in junior, intermediate, and senior? So we'll end with this question.
This is a great question. And there is a lot of nuances into that question. So I probably can't answer that question in a minute or two. What I could leave you with is I would recommend looking at Ravi Mehta's product manager competencies. He spent a good chunk of his time thinking this through about the different competencies that you would have from being an APM all the way up to the VP, and how that changes over time. The competencies are the same, but you can have different weights over time, right? Like if I had to summarize it, as a junior PM, you're focused a lot of your efforts on execution. You're doing little to no strategy work. You do talk to some of your customers and whatnot, but a lot of it is spent on like product execution. And as you grow into a PM and a senior PM, you get to shift that a bit. So you spend more time on talking to your customers, understanding their problems, coming up with new solutions to their problems, and thinking about product strategy, influencing people within the organization. And so there's that. If I had to summarize that, that's kind of how it would shift a bit over time. But the competency doc, which actually we used to have a competency doc ourselves, and as we thought about upgrading it over time, we found that we didn't need to reinvent the wheel. Ravi did a really great job at writing the competencies there. And the high level, he has 4 buckets of the competencies. There's product execution, which is basically defining, building, and launching exceptional products. The second one is customer insight, so understanding and fulfill customer needs. The third one is product strategy, so it's delivering business impact via product innovation. And the last one, which is influencing people, which is rallying people around the team's work. Within each of those 4 buckets, there's there's a bit more competencies within that to be able to understand it even at a deeper level. I would definitely suggest you go and look at it at your own time as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mostafa. You've given us like a wealth of knowledge, even like, yeah, I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and share all of your learnings and insights. This was a wonderful session. So thank you so much for being with us. If you're interested, feel free to stay behind. We'll have like an extra 10 minutes of sort of like networking. I'm going to open 3 breakout rooms for people to like come in and chat. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, Mostafa, for joining us. Happy to chat and sort of like talk about how this session went. And yeah, I'll be opening up the session now, and I'm going to stop recording. And if you want to hang around, feel free to hang around.
Thanks, everybody.